is Thanksgiving, my favorite time of year. I hope you all enjoyed it with friends and family. And my tradition for Thanksgiving is to go to my mother's house, the house I grew up in, and spend Thanksgiving with my brother, my sister, and some of our close family friends. We took off last Tuesday night, and we arrived at 4 a.m. in Baltimore. And when we pulled into the driveway, my girlfriend and I, the first thing we noticed was my mom's Thanksgiving decorations. Now, what you typically expect to see for your Thanksgiving decorations are a pumpkin, maybe some gourds, or a turkey of some sort. Well, what my mother had was a 4-foot-long alligator with a pilgrim hat and a stuffed turkey.
Okay.
Walking into the house, you'll notice that the house is very well decorated. There are quilts up, and you'll see a lot of alligators throughout the house. It's a theme that we have. It's woven into her quilts on the wall. In the china cabinet, there are figurines, trinkets that she's picked up in the form of alligators. And on the windowsill, there's a felted alligator from one of her crafts that she's actually felted. And every year at Thanksgiving, actually during Christmas and Easter as well, she tells the same story. It's a story that it's not just hers, it's also my brothers and my sisters and our guests. They love it, and they're always super enthusiastic. The time our 4-foot alligator escaped in our living room. Now this wasn't the first time he escaped. Oh, I should show you the picture. This was our 4-foot alligator in our living room. Wow. And this wasn't the first time he escaped. The first time he escaped, he was only 2 feet long. And my brother was able to capture him, pick him up with 2 hands, and put him back in the cage. Calvin, named after my favorite baseball player, Cal Ripken Jr., was the alligator's name. And when he put him in the tank, Calvin whipped back, snatched his hand, and ripped his finger open. So now every year during Thanksgiving, when my mother tells the story, my brother has this really cool, gnarly scar to show. Fortunately, I don't have a scar to show, or I guess unfortunately, but I do have a story to tell from when I captured Calvin and put him back in the cage. This time I was a little bit smarter about it. I took a trash can. He was 3 feet long at the time. And I took a trash can and I scooped him in with a broom, lifted up the trash can, and dumped him back into the cage. But the 3rd time he escaped, he was too large. And I think when we originally brought him into the house, my mother didn't realize how large an caiman would get. She was very busy with her OBGYN practice. She had 3 kids involved in extracurricular activities, and she didn't do the research that she normally would before bringing an animal into our house. And another contributing factor to his size was we fed him, and we fed him a lot. You see, his tank was 6 feet long, 2 feet high, and it was in our center of our living room. We had to move our TV to the basement to accommodate this alligator. And my dad loved feeding him. Anytime we had guests over, we had guests over a lot, they would crowd around this aquarium. And my dad he'd get giddy. He'd run into the kitchen, he'd grab the stew meat that he bought the day before, the cheapest kind you could get, it was beef, and he loaded up his feeding stick, which was it was a dowel rod about 1 inch thick with a rubber hose on the end, which was spliced like this. So you could wedge a piece of meat in there. It was about 3 feet long. Everybody would crowd around him. They'd kind of shriek when he moved the top of the aquarium off, so the half was open and half was covered. And he would take this rod with a piece of meat and dangle it over. And Calvin, caimans, they're a type of alligator, and they get really excited when they see food. They turn black. So he would turn black, open up his mouth and hiss, and then he'd rear back. And my dad had the stick, and Calvin would slowly rise up, and he'd launch, and he'd clap his jaws. But my dad would pull back the meat, and Calvin would sink back down and turn even blacker because he was mad this time. He'd start hissing and rear back again and launch up. And this time my dad would let him take the meat. And caimans, it's instinct to drown their prey after they catch it. So he would sit in the water and then rear his head back and guzzle down this meat. Before he could even finish guzzling down the meat, my dad loaded up another piece of meat for him. So anytime a guest would come over, we'd feed them 4 or 5 pieces of meat, and they just loved it. It was a reason, doing that in retrospect was a reason why he got large, but also a reason why he was trained to escape. So he wasn't always that large. Actually, the story starts when I was 9 years old, and my brother, sister, father were going to get my brother and I our bi-monthly haircuts at a barbershop. barbershop was conveniently located next to a Chinese food restaurant, which was conveniently located next to a pet store called Seabreeze. So after we got our choir boy haircuts, my dad walked my sister, my brother and I into the pet store. My dad and my sister immediately turned left to the 3 aisles of fish, and they looked at the fish. My brother walked in, he loved bunny rabbits, and they had a corral of bunny rabbits. You couldn't pick them up. Well, my brother would sit there and he'd pet them. I would go straight for the reptiles, the Burmese pythons, the frogs, the snakes. And this time, there was something special on display. It was 4 feet high, which is chest level now, but I was 9, I was looking up at it, and in it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It was 20 caimans. They're all this long, and their heads were poking up above water with their nose, but their tails could barely touch the bottom of the water. And they had 20 in the tank. They were $89 each. I knew I wanted one, and I went home. My birthday was in 3 months, and I knew I really wanted one, but there was no chance my mother would agree to bring an alligator in the house. So I just forgot about it until the next day at the after-school program with all the other kids who didn't get picked up on time from school because their parents were working. I talked to my friend Robbie. Robbie shared my enthusiasm for reptiles. He had a pet frog named Milton with 1 tooth that he would feed a mouse once a month. And I was fascinated by this frog, and I thought he'd really enjoy when I told him about these caimans. Well, when I told him, he didn't even flinch. He said, "Oh yeah, I have a pet alligator. It's 1 foot long." I take him out of the cage sometimes, and I pet his belly. Actually, I do that every night, and I walk him sometimes on a leash. So I went home that night. I said, "Mom, this was my chance. I waited for her to get home. It was 8 p.m., probably after a hard delivery. And she walked in the door, and I went downstairs, and I said, 'Mom, I know what I want for my birthday, and it'll really make me happy.' But I knew her response, so I said the key phrase. I said, 'Robbie has one. It's a caiman. It's an alligator.' So I found out years later when my mom met Diane at a school function. She went up to her and said, 'So what did you do when your alligator got large?' Diane looked. She said, 'You know, when it got to 4 feet long, we had to call animal control and have them taken out of our lab.' Diane looked, very confused. It turned out Robbie had made up the entire story. But I received an alligator on January 14, 1998 for my 10th birthday. Looking back, we actually had a second alligator, but that's a whole other story. We got the tank out and no more alligators, and then one of my dad's patients was a police officer. I'm not going to go into long story short. He confiscated this alligator from a drug bust, and they were feeding it dog food in the pet store, and or in the office where the police station, skylarking. Anyways, so he basically forced it on my dad. He said, "You got to take this alligator." My dad, with an open heart, brought this alligator in our house. Same thing happened. We grew it to 4 feet long. We had him in a 300-gallon Rubbermaid pond in the basement by my sister's room, who was a sophomore in high school at the time, and he escaped as well, but we knew the drill this time. My sister was coming home from school, my mom was in the kitchen, and my sister was walking downstairs to unload her backpack and maybe shower up, and my mom said, "Oh, by the way, Pablo's out." It was blocking her from getting into her room, so of course she called animal control and took him away. Anyways, now, it's been 8 years since my mother had an alligator in the house. It's been 5 years since my youngest sibling moved out. My mom's an empty nester, and my parents are now divorced. And for her, I think the alligator is not just a story or a unique pet. For her, it's a symbol of a time when a chaotic, happy time, when she was Supermom, and her family was all under one roof, and she was that cool mother that brought home an alligator for her son's 10th birthday. Thanks.
Well, that's a great story. Alligators in the house, sleeping here. Yeah, amazing. So well done. I appreciate that. So next up for our second speech, we have Tim Hutchinson, and Tim is an organizational and motivational guy. You've heard